Welcome to the Coach Doctor podcast, a podcast where we discuss aspects of sports coaching from grassroots to grandstands. I'm your host, James Barkell, and on this podcast, we hear from academics who research coaching. We talk to coaches on the front line from development levels through to professional coaches, and we discuss other elements of successful sporting programs with experts and practitioners from a range of sports science fields, motivational psychology, strength and conditioning, and many other elements required for successful performance. If you'd like to know more about what we do at The Coach Doctor, you can visit our website, thecoachdoctor.com.au, and learn more about our services, or follow me on Instagram at thecoachdr or Twitter at James_Barkell for more regular information. Today I'm talking with Alicia Edge. Alicia is the co-founder and principal dietitian at Compeat Performance, a company that is revolutionising athlete nutrition and well-being through technology. Alicia is also the lead performance dietitian for the Matildas, the Australian women's football team, who won the hearts of millions for their performances at the 2023 FIFA World Cup. She has also held nutritionist roles at the Australian Institute of Sport and the New South Wales Waratahs Rugby Union. I first met Alicia at an Exercise and Sports Science Australia forum that was discussing women in sport, and I saw someone who was very passionate about sport and performance, and more importantly, about female health and wellbeing. Alicia later joined me on a panel at the Business and Development of Women in Football conference, and again, her passion for advocating for women in sport, not just as athletes, but in all of the support roles such as coaching and organisational roles, was inspirational. Alicia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Could you start off by giving me a brief overview of what you do and how you got into sports nutrition?
Yeah, so my days are always pretty different. I am a tech startup founder alongside being a performance dietitian, so a very non-tech startup founder. And sports nutrition was something I didn't necessarily always endeavour to be in, but I was someone who went into study nutrition also loving sport. So I guess maybe my destiny was already decided by that point. But for the first few years of my profession, after graduating, I didn't do really much sports nutrition at all. Did lots of community, clinical, and kept bubbling away with interest while I was kind of in Ironman, triathlon, running, and hockey circles. So I was kind of like getting my interest in sports. It wasn't until we got back from, we did a year's trip away in 2010 to the Netherlands to play hockey, my husband and I, well, my partner, who is now my husband, and we got back and I went for the AIS fellowship a few years in a row and got closer and closer each time, and was really fortunate to gain the AIS fellowship position, which is like an entry-level sports nutrition almost scholarship in 2013. So from then on, I was just embedded in sport, absolutely obsessed with sports nutrition, and really, really grateful for that experience to then launch me into all things sports nutrition for the rest of my career, hopefully.
I'm really keen to discuss two things today. Firstly, nutrition specifically for elite female athletes, and secondly, your company, Compeat Performance. But let's start with female athletes. Do we need to consider differences in nutrition for male and female athletes?
Yeah, to some extent, like the way that we might address it or go about nutrition recommendations will vary, and needs and priority areas will be different. However, I have worked a lot with elite professional male athletes and also a lot with female, and I would say the way that we generally approach it is to get to know them first. And so that approach doesn't change whether they're male or female. It's just that the gap areas or priority areas might vary depending on what we're really focusing on and what's presenting at the time, whether that be, the foundations of nutrition around relationship with food and body alongside skill-based and knowledge-based areas. And then we launch pad into, the things that are more performance-focused or science-focused when that allows. But the foundation of nutrition actually don't vary too much between males and females. It's when we get into the nitty-gritty performance stuff that we tend to see different priority areas pop up.
Okay, I guess going from there, is the female athlete triad a model that we should be considering and focusing on for female athletes?
Yeah, I really am glad you brought that up, because the female athlete triad is still bubbling away in the background. But in about 2013, 2014, what happened was there was a release in the IOC that released a syndrome called relative energy deficiency in sport. And what that was appreciating was female athlete triad absolutely existed, but what it wasn't covering was a wider syndrome of symptoms, and also allowing it to be something that impacted male athletes as well. So even though the female athlete triad covers, those three, I guess, points in the triangle, where it's underfueling or really around that disordered eating all the way to anorexia, bone health, and menstrual cycle, relative energy deficiency takes all those things, but also adds the performance aspects and other metabolic changes that happen if someone isn't covering the cost of their exercise and their cost of what their body actually needs to thrive in terms of all those body functions. So relative energy deficiency is kind of what we're now working alongside, because it does encapsulate both genders, but it also really appreciates that it impacts health and performance and well-being all in one when we do underfuel or undereat compared to how much energy we actually need to thrive.
Earlier on, you talked about the nitty-gritty at the performance level. What are some of the performance aspects that might be considered when looking at fueling a female athlete compared with a male athlete? And does it change at different times around the menstrual cycle as well?
Yeah, I think the first thing to cover there is definitely that underfueling and fueling enough piece. I think I'd often joke that my main job is just giving people permission to eat and eat enough. I feel like there is so much conflict of information, particularly in social media spaces, but also depending on the environment they're in and the conversations they're holding internally, but also externally around food and their body, will be my main role, I would say, in working with female athletes, but also in male athletes as well. I think we need to make sure that is part of the conversation at times, because we do focus a lot on the female when it comes to underfueling or disordered eating. And underfueling is one of the things that underpin everything, right? Like if we are not covering the cost of our energy needed, we're going to be impacting our ability to recover, our ability to adapt to the training that we're doing, but we're also going to be dimming the switch, if you like, or putting your phone on low power mode on some of those really important metabolic processes that our body actually needs to thrive. And that's where we might see a dimming of things like our hormones, where the menstrual cycle might go on pause or it might be delayed, and an athlete may not get their menstrual cycle, from 15 onwards. We would say that's a concern. Or if it paused for 2 to 3 months, that would also be a concern onwards. We might also see issues with decision making, focus, concentration, because of the impact that can have when we are underfueling, and also gut upset. So there's lots of different things it impacts. And then on the longer term side, we do start to see reductions in bone mineral density, fertility, and all those longer term issues. When someone's underfueling, they're 8 to 10 times more likely to suffer a stress fracture, for example. If someone is experiencing disordered eating disorder, we see an increase in injury risk too. So even though my focus is always on the athlete wellbeing side, the two between wellbeing and performance and availability intersect, and they can't necessarily be separated. So that's a really big part of how, I guess, we talk to our key stakeholders in terms of like high performance managers, and the overall SSM unit is all about player availability, both mentally but also physically.
Okay, so you talked about underfueling and that being a potential problem. Does underfueling refer to, or does it take into consideration any specific macronutrients or micronutrients? Does that matter in terms of the fueling, or is it just a total energy requirements? And if our athletes are meeting their energy requirements, that's a great start. And after that, anything else that we can add to that is a bonus.
You've summed that up so beautifully, James. So much of what we do is about adequacy first. And it's like, okay, well, first of all, we need to make sure you're eating enough. And however that comes in, sometimes I think if someone looked at what I was recommending without context, they'd be like, they call themselves a dietitian? That's really bizarre. But we're just finding who they are, what their problems are, what their barriers are to, say, eating enough. And that could be their relationship with food, but it could also be accidental in terms of just the pressures they've got day to day, but it also could be on purpose, where they're trying to reduce their weight or change their body composition. So we look at what's creating that underfueling and then try and nail the barriers, I guess, towards overcoming that. And that's our foundation of like, okay, everything else can come next. And that's when we start to then look at those macronutrients, making sure they're getting enough carbohydrate in to fuel the level of training and the load they're doing at that time. Protein, of course, being consistent over the day, but also being adequate to cover the cost of, recovering those muscles, building them, getting stronger and really driving that adaptation. And then alongside that, we're then going, okay, we need the diversity of fats, we need adequate fiber, we need color, we need all those antioxidants coming in to ensure that they are recovering really well and thriving both in their physical function, but also preventing things like injury and illness as well.
And in terms of micronutrients, things like iron, you said they're important for both male and female athletes, but has it got more of a significant impact for female athletes?
We definitely see iron deficiency or suboptimal iron levels quite common in female athletes. It's one of the most frequent things we test for. And for those playing at home, iron is a critical part of transporting oxygen. So if you're thinking about the needs of oxygen to thrive and actually perform, it's really, really important. And some people will have suboptimal iron levels and not actually feel like they're symptomatic. And then others will feel really symptomatic, like lightheadedness, fatigue, flat, all those types of things. When we're looking at iron, we obviously go with a food first approach, but often that doesn't mean food only. And we sometimes do need to consider oral supplementation, or if someone is really low in iron stores, we like to fill that bath up first and consider an infusion, and then kind of drip feed that bath to good levels with oral and food options as well. But iron is probably the key thing that we'll be considering in most female athletes. It does get connected to underfueling and energy deficiency, but also alongside that body fat percentage and all those types of things. So if you're looking at lean, active athletes, iron deficiency is one of those things that we're always kind of aware of and making sure that we're navigating and monitoring.
Alicia, I first came in contact with you at the ESSA Women in Sport conference. And one of the things you spoke about was disordered eating and the prevalence of disordered eating in both male and females. But there is a high incidence of disordered eating amongst female athletes. Could you shed any light on the statistics and some of the potential causes for disordered eating?
Absolutely. And wider population in general too. It's just one of those things that I am really grateful that it's gaining airtime and conversation, particularly on the female side. I feel like it is gaining momentum and openness in conversation. To start that, I guess it's important that we really clarify what disordered eating is or means. And if you think about it like it's on a continuum, right? Our relationship with food and body is always shifting and changing. It'll be influenced by all different things around us, but also internal dialogue and stresses within us as well that we're going through. So on one end, we might have that green optimal nutrition, where we like to think of that as, it's optimal in the way of being flexible, but also performance driven. And, it has that flexibility to still enjoy food and not take up too much space in our life, while still being, great options considering what we're trying to get out of in our performance. When we start to shift to what we would refer to in our minds as amber, is where we would say that's a disordered way of eating or a disordered relationship with food or body. That might feel like having food take up a whole lot more space in our heads than it should. We might notice feelings of anxiety or shame or guilt around our food decisions, either at the time or around meal times or afterwards. We might start to limit certain food groups or food types. But we also might notice things like feeling out of control around food and those types of things. It's not at a level to be diagnosed with an eating disorder based around the classifications for mental health, but it is definitely where we loved early intervention and awareness and support to move someone back to optimal. It's much easier to turn someone back to optimal from there than waiting for that to basically move to the red of that continuum, which is considered eating disorder. Now, eating disorders, I think when we think about an eating disorder, what you might notice in your mind is, this young, white, female, anorexia type of body type. But that's only 3% of those with eating disorders would be considered underweight, 3%. So most people with eating disorders don't look a certain way. They don't have a certain body composition or a certain body type. And the behaviours around food aren't always restriction. It can feel and look like that, binge eating. It can look and feel like purging in the way of doing extra exercise, not being able to take a rest day, for example, having to always burn to earn your food. It can still look like restriction or minimising how often we're eating or how much we're eating. There might not be social occasion around food anymore, and all these types of things start to come into it. Now, if you think about all those things and feelings around food and body, we can start to then unpack why we might see higher rates of that in females, but also higher rates in athletes. Athletes are generally quite high-achieving humans. They might have perfectionist tendencies, and they might also be in situations where they're always comparing to everyone else or wanting the best things, but they also might be looking for a sense of control as well. So if you think about if you can't control everything else going in your life, sometimes food is where you do find control or that sense of comfort. And so we're looking at rates of disordered eating, remembering that's like in the amber upwards, of around 2 out of 3 female athletes, we would generally say is the average. That can be lower in some cohorts, higher in some cohorts, but around 50 to 60% of female individuals in sport. So we're saying the majority actually have some anxiety, guilt, shame around food or body. In the male space, that's still 1 in 3. And so I think we can all kind of take a place of go, we should actually approach this, with almost an assumption that someone is finding things hard around food or body and thoughts around that, and then move backward rather than assuming that everyone is fine and then going the other way. So a big part of my role is ensuring that we're early to detect these types of changes, because changes in our relationship with food and body often happen with transitions. And if you think about an athlete's life, there's a lot of transitions. They might be moving away from home, they might be changing clubs, they might lose contracts, they may feel pressure from their environment, they may get injured. All these types of moments or transitions are increases in risk around relationship with food and body. So yeah, it's a really big part of what I do. I think 10 years ago, it wasn't even on my radar, James. Like, I would just be all performance driven and be like, eating disorders isn't my thing. I'd always refer on. Most people are fine. But the more I kind of pulled that string, the more questions I asked, the more stories I listened to, the more I just gave athletes voice, time in terms of how I would approach them and how, I wanted to support them. I realized that this had to be one of the foundation pieces of performance nutrition. Because if someone is feeling anxious, worried, guilt, shame around food, their ability to make decisions, to concentrate, and to do the performance nutrition concepts that we want, which is, say, eating enough carbohydrates or timing those types of things, aren't actually going to happen until we achieve this base layer. So, yeah, optimal nutrition or that relationship with food and body is a massive part of what I do.
It must be difficult to broach something like that when you're working with athletes. Are there any signs and symptoms that you look for outside of those transitional periods, like moving clubs or moving away from home, that you need to look for? I guess it's a very private thing for a lot of people that they probably don't want to talk about. So how do you bring it up?
I like to say that often I'm the one of the last to know in the performance environment, and some of my biggest assets are the other staff and players on the ground. And so part of early intervention is creating a safe environment, and that safe environment also means that there's an openness to conversation. And I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think some of us really do pull away from bringing that conversation to the forefront, because it's like, well, that's a really vulnerable thing to first of all bring up. What kind of response or reaction am I going to get from this person if I do try and bring it up? And also, I don't know all the answers if they do say it's a problem. So maybe I'm not the best person, or I don't want to make it worse. But all those things are things we actually know aren't true. And everyone is in a really great place to bring up a really, open conversation around what they would like to, achieve, but also like what kind of things they might be worried about. And things like, I noticed that. Or, oh, when this happened, I noticed, so they're things that are inviting conversation rather than going, oh, you're not doing this, or why don't you do that, are really important to try and, reduce that blame on that person. I think a really big part of that too is sometimes we wait until they look a certain way, and sometimes they may be waiting until they look a certain way, or like, I'm not the skinniest yet, or I don't look like I've got an eating disorder enough yet, and all those types of things are really prominent voices often. So I think the message is that everyone is in that place to have that safe conversation, and acknowledging you don't have to have all the answers to have that conversation is really important too. If you're the trusted person in that person's life, you can absolutely bring up that you are concerned or you have noticed something, and would they like to, chat more about it, or chat to someone else. But in terms of how we also bring up that conversation, we obviously talk to our athletes all the time via our app, but also just in general conversation. And alongside that, we do screening at least twice a year. So the screening questions are very similar. Where have you noticed that? Blah, blah, blah. Have you noticed that? Da, da, da. So it's just like really invitation to reflect, invitation to appreciate that our relationship with body and how we think about food can change. And we want to get on top of that early rather than waiting for it to become more of a severe problem or harder to turn around. But normalizing that conversation is such a key part of it. So it's very cultural and environmental as well.
Okay, and when you talk about normalising, talking about disordered eating, do you try to educate athletes beforehand and bring it into the open environment in group situations so that, again, it feels normal discussing it and helps people feel a little more comfortable to talk about it with you if they do feel like it's a concern for themselves?
Absolutely. I think awareness is so underrated sometimes, and I think progress can actually just look like awareness a lot of the time. So I used to think, being a dietitian, success would be 100% engagement. All the players would be talking to me, all the athletes would be talking to me, and they'd be really keen and excited about food. But I now know that that's not the case. The success in being a great practitioner is appreciating that you've set up an environment that's safe. You've set up a rapport that is, something that the players or the athletes really value, but also you've set up a system where they know who to come to and when to come to you if they do notice something. So we start our education really early. We probably start talking about body and relationship with food earlier than people would even appreciate, only because if we're bringing up these conversations, we're not going to make the problem worse. What we're doing is educating around, this is something that you might notice over time. These are things that are common, but don't sit on them as if they're normal. These are the things that you might happen as you progress through your career, but also these are the people you want to turn to for support if you notice that happening. And so I'll get messages or calls of like, oh, Alicia, I just noticed that I've been feeling this way around food lately, or I noticed this happen and that's not usually like me. And so we're getting onto it really early rather than waiting for either the screening tool to happen or for it to become so severe that others are concerned as well. So, it's like that awareness and appreciating that there's like that really good knowledge base to then know when to reach out or when something might be common and not something to be ashamed of, but also not something that's normal.
Yeah, that's great. So that it's almost teaching athletes to become proactive about the way they're feeling about food and their own well-being as well.
Yeah, and taking that blame away, because the thing we know about relationship with food is it's not one factor that will create this disorder way of eating or stress around eating or food and body. It'll be all different types of factors, and some of those we can control, but so many others we can't. And so normalizing that and making sure they're aware of, this isn't actually my fault. And there are other things, that I can control around this, but a whole lot of things I can't, is really, really empowering to kind of put early in the conversation. In terms of what sport can do better is those controllables, right? So a big part of my passion area is setting up safe environments. So what are we doing in terms of safety around measuring weights, body composition? How are we talking around bodies? What comments are people making around bodies and weights and those types of things around their players and their athletes? Because I think in sport there's a really big assumption that body composition is a performance measure, but we really have very little evidence to actually show that there's certain body fat percentages or skin folds that lead to better performance. The only real tie we've got to performance is when we look at some sports around lean mass. And that makes sense, right? More strength, more power. And so, if we're going to measure body composition, we can absolutely consider measuring lean mass when it's really targeted or necessary, but systematic weights or body compositions being done, say, every fortnight or every month, whatever the sport may decide, is actually not evidence-based and it's not purposeful. So really making sure that we're challenging the bias or assumption that sometimes we do hold around body composition and performance is a really key part of the conversations I have often.
One of the other things I wanted to discuss, which ties into what we were just talking about, and athlete performance. Obviously, there's been a massive rise in social media in the last 10 years or so, and you see a lot of athletes on social media. Sometimes they're advertising things and sometimes it's another opportunity for more revenue. But from a female perspective, there seems to be an expectation for female athletes to be posting photos in swimwear or in uniforms that tend to be a lot more revealing than male uniforms. Beach volleyball comes to mind as an example. How might that impact the way that athletes are eating?
Absolutely. I think we're still in a state where the way that we feel like we should look cosmetically in terms of Instagrammable and in a bikini is very different to what our bodies adapt to for performance. And so like often I'll explain it like, you know, almost a triangle, terrible for podcasts, but here I am with a triangle. And, you know, we've got body composition on one side, health on one side and performance on the other in terms of the triangle corners. And if we bring that dot from the middle of that triangle all the way to body composition, let's say physique competition, it's at the opposite of health and performance, right? Like when these people step on stage looking, you know, lean and muscular, they are actually at their worst. They are flat, they are dehydrated, they're feeling terrible, right? So if we're aiming only for body composition or what we look like, we're going to lose out to health, but we're also going to lose out to performance. If we aim only for health, we're going to miss out on some of the body composition, also performance areas too. And if we aim only for performance, sometimes our body composition may not look how we want it to or how we think it should, but also some of the health comes at a cost too. So it is a really fine balance of going, what's our goal right now? What's our key focus? What's the timing like? What have we got coming up? And where is our focus going to be when it comes to nutrition? And it can be really conflicting to feel like I want everything to do with performance and I want to achieve my best performance, but I also know or I'm concerned about how big my quads are going to become or what are my arms going to look like, and that can be really conflicting. So I think it's a really important conversation. I don't think we're there yet, but social media has a really big positive part to play because I know in the questions you sent me, you mentioned Ilona, and she's one of my favorite Instagram stars. She's been my favorite for a really long time, so I'm so glad other people have found her now. She's very big in body acceptance, and she's a beautiful spokesperson in terms of permission to fuel and eat, but also permission to be big and take up space and be strong and powerful in the female space. So there's social media in a really positive sense, and sometimes what we're doing is we're coaching athletes how to set up their social media feed to be that positive influence. And if something is causing you to feel ashamed or guilty or comparing in a really negative way, showing them how to unfollow and giving permission to do that, because you can set up your algorithm and you can set up your social media to be a really positive space, like almost an extended community, but at the same time it can also become very toxic and very overwhelming. And, you know, that beautiful overused saying of comparison is the thief of joy really does ring true a lot of the time when it comes to comparing plates and comparing bodies. So yeah, really, really challenging. I think the biggest positive in terms of the Olympics so far is there's so much more body positive talk happening around the diversity of athlete bodies and the purpose and the performance within those rather than what they're looking like in their uniform.
Yeah, great. So there's been a little bit of a shift in society that's moving towards a focus on performance rather than the way someone looks. And yeah, I was going to talk to you about Ilona Maher. For those who aren't aware, she's an American rugby sevens athlete that has now become the most followed rugby union player in the world on Instagram, more than any male player. So I guess it's a big step for women's sport. She's really promoting female athletes. She's also promoting rugby in the States, which is not a major sport at all. So there's a lot of positivity coming out of social media as well.
And she's just hilarious. So she's just got the whole package, really. I love it. I saw something the other day go, I really enjoyed following Alona. She was funny. She was great with social media. So I just assumed she was okay at rugby sevens. Like, obviously she was all right because she's in the team, but I just thought she'd be like one of the players. But it turns out she's the best. She's the best at social media. She's the best in terms of spokesperson, but also she's also the best in rugby sevens. So yeah, I love that. She's definitely the whole package, and I'm really glad that she's got the following she deserves for her beautiful messaging and what she's doing for other women, but also men in sport as well.
Alicia, let's turn the attention now to your company, Compeat Performance, spelled COMPEAT, as in eat. What is it and what do you do?
Yeah, we started Compeat in 2016, 2017 is really where we started it properly. For the main reason that I left the AIS in 2015 to start a family and have our first bub in 2015. And by 2016, we'd moved to a really small country town called Foster on the mid-north coast. And I was like, geez, I don't know what my career path is here. Like, I've just been at the AIS with, I've really worked on my career. But now what do? Do I work in an aged care facility? Do I hire out a clinic at the GP centre? Like, I just had no career path. And that's really common in dietetics. There's a real lack of career path in many areas. And my husband, Dan, was like, well, that's not going to happen. Like, we've just given up a lot to, do your years at AIS. You've worked really hard on that. What's another option? Do you have to be in front of someone to be their dietitian? And, we looked at that and we're like, man, we could do something online. And this was very new. We were not the most popular people for trying to do this because it was like, how can you give dietetic advice when you're not in the room with someone? And this was pre-COVID, everyone. So it was very new. We started to play around with WordPress and very rudimentary technology to see how we could coach someone through nutrition from afar. And so we played around with memberships and different things. And I really went out going, I'll just give whatever athletes need in terms of what they're asking for, which was meal plans and prescription and all these types of things. And took us a year or two to realize that the churn on that was like, that's what people are asking for and that's what people think they need. But it's actually not working. It's very short term. It's not actually creating behavior change. And so we started to ask more questions of our athletes and we started to get to know them a little bit more. And we started to realize that, food is a science, but eating is a behavior. And we needed to appreciate, if we wanted to change someone's ways of eating, we needed to actually get to know them as a person first and meet them where they are. And so we changed our model to be tech-enabled. We connect dietitians from all over Australia with athletes and active individuals. We have a very wide variety of individuals that work with us, and they work alongside our tech. And the reason for that is that behavior change and frictions to behavior change happen all the time. They don't wait for us to have an appointment. They don't wait for us, to see us in 2 weeks' time. And we've made it a whole lot more person-centered and client-centered for that reason. So they can reach out to their dietitian anytime. We reply within 24 hours is our goal. And within that, we also add different things to the app, which are very centered around what kind of things they're working on. For some people, that may be working around their relationship with food. For others, that may be race day planning and practicing in lead up for a marathon. So really diverse range of things. And it's always focused on behavior change, coaching, and making sure that we're appreciating what someone's barriers are and what their enablers are to being their version of performance, if you like. Because performance, I think, often we leave for the athletes, but aren't we all just trying to perform at our very best? So we really work to define what performance means in someone's life and their identity of who they want to be and how they want to show up, not just what they want to look like. So we really do challenge the, status quo in nutrition still, but we do feel like there's a shift happening and people are starting to appreciate that there's a bigger element and value, to nutrition that is way more than numbers and way more than macros and way more than meal plans. So, yeah, we take a very, a psychological nutrition approach, and we have psychologists advising for that very reason, to elevate our dietitians, but to also elevate our clients as well.
Okay, great. And from a technological perspective, you referred to yourself as a tech startup. What is some of the technology that you use with your clients?
We are still really rudimentary with our tech. If anyone has tried to build tech, they'll really appreciate how expensive it is. It is out of control. So we've taken an approach of trying all different things and really making sure that we're testing different ideas with the cheapest way of doing so before we decide to build, because we are very bootstrapped, which means we are self-funded most of the time. We've taken a little bit of capital from small investors to keep us afloat. But as a tech startup will know, you're always running out of money because it costs more to build tech than you will ever bring in. So it's always a bit of a balancing act. It's very stressful. But in terms of the way that we do it, it is part of getting to know that person and meeting them where they're at. So we have some individuals that love a video call, some that love a phone call, some that just love the chat function within our app, and some that are a combination. So we generally do fit in a whole range of things. We'll always have a video call to start. That's like a no-brainer for us. It builds rapport. It ensures that we're having that really fluid conversation from the start. But then ongoing from that, we'll be coaching someone mainly through text, voice memos, those types of things, and then jumping on calls as needed. So yeah, lots of different methods of communication because our lives are busy, right? And especially when we're working with active individuals that are also working full-time and have a family, finding time for an appointment and navigating that is really, really challenging. So we've taken out the waiting time and we've just allowed those conversations to happen freely at a time that suits the person, not just the dietitian.
Okay, so you mentioned an app. Is it all done through a phone or via a website?
Yeah, it's an app on the phone. Like, it's still at a place where, like, we are so proud of what it does, but I just am still dreaming of what it could be once we have the money. So it's a real hard thing for a recovering perfectionist to build tech, because it's one of those things where you have to start somewhere. And the function of it is fantastic, but we still have so much cool stuff to come. So yeah, you can download it actually, and it's Compeat. You can download it for free, and all our recipes are free, which is our gift to you. And then basically you can just sign up with the dietitian from the app. And what it does is connects you with the person that's going to be best suited to your needs or the things that you're flagging with as priorities. And then you get connected with one of our dietitians. So yeah, the process is been something we're really proud of. And I think the other thing to that, which I mentioned earlier, is that career path or flexibility in employment for dietitians is also really challenging. So to be able to navigate that part of the equation as well and, gain access to clients for our dietitians and our dietitian team has been a really rewarding part of the business side too.
Fantastic. And if you had unlimited funds, what would be the first thing you would add to develop it?
Yeah. At the moment, the main part of the technology is the connection with the dietitian and the coaching. But what we want to really build and what we've scoped out already is the middle part, where we appreciate that there's so many things people can improve in terms of the nutrition and relationship with food and behaviour within food and their environment. But not everyone needs or wants a dietitian. But there's still a middle ground of a whole lot of things that can be improved and enhanced in how they feel around themselves and also in energy levels and things like that. So the middle part is what we would work on next. And we've mapped out our screens. It's just a matter of now going to that next phase of getting it built so that people can go through and navigate what their priority areas are with our IP, which we've created in terms of a screening tool, which we use with all our athletes now. And then that then guides them on what kind of learnings, but also habits they'll be building as well. So yeah, lots of exciting things to come. I'm just impatient.
Yeah, aren't we all? And Alicia, from a sports performance perspective, you work with both teams and individual athletes, as well as people who just want to be healthier. I think you mentioned that you also had Sydney Uni Sports as a client.
Yeah, so we teamed up with Sydney Uni a couple of years ago, and we were able to give their scholarship athletes access to the app, but also screening and some group education and things. The way that we do our performance programs is we've also got an internal team. So we've got an internal performance team that links out in with our bigger contracts. Say, for example, the Football Australia contract where we're working with the female player pathway. That's our internal team working with that in terms of the staff, the environment setting, but also the players, and making sure that we're screening and acknowledging risk as it occurs. And then the one-to-one people and athletes that want to join us are working with our contracted dietitian. So we've got kind of two teams. And then on the other side, we realized that there's lots of areas of improvement of how dietitians practice. So we've started the Compeat Academy a couple of years ago to make sure that we're accelerating the knowledge and competence of dietitians. So we've currently got over 70 dietitians in there learning away, and a really cool community. So yeah, there's a few different aspects, but yeah, it's a really fun part of what we do.
Oh, wow. So there's like an educational aspect, a sports performance aspect, and then just a general individual health and wellbeing type of aspect as well.
Exactly right. Yeah, because so much of what we learn as dietitians is very sciencey, right? It's very clinical and fantastic and needed. But then once we get out and we're working with people, we realize that doesn't actually work, or it doesn't work for long. So what we're doing in the academy is really allowing our dietitian practitioners to meet someone where they're at and really enable behaviour change focus rather than prescription focused, and making sure that we're standing beside our clients or our athletes, because they're the experts in their life. We're just the experts in nutrition, and how do we meet to actually be able to facilitate change alongside them, not being, the hierarchical structure that I think sometimes is in terms of specialist support or training or coaching. So yeah, we're just changing the way that that's structured, and that's been really, really amazing to have that community of like-minded dietitians as well.
Alicia, I guess before we go, there's one big thing that I wanted to ask you about, and I guess from my perspective, it would have been a really, really exciting thing to be involved with. You mentioned Football Australia, and you were involved with the Matildas throughout the World Cup, and you still are. What was it like being involved with that team during the World Cup in Australia, when all the eyes of Australia and the hearts of Australia were with the team and were supporting the team, and you saw, I guess, a growth in football but also women's sport in Australia? What was that like for you to be involved in that group?
I've been with Football Australia now for 5 years, and our company's had a contract with them for 5 years. And, at the start of that contract, I felt like I was always having to sell how cool my job was. I was always like, no, guys, I get to work with the Matildas. They're amazing. They're really cool chicks and very talented. And I was like, yeah, okay, I guess that's okay. And then as we led into the World Cup, I'd still get questions of oh, how you been? I was like, oh, things are busy, World Cup's coming up. And they're like, oh, when's that? And I was like, oh, next month. And they're like, where is it? I'm like, here. And I was so worried. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how this is going to go. Is Australia going to absolutely flunk at this in terms of the crowd not being present at all? And it came to the first game and I was like, okay, I think this is going to be okay. And everyone just got on that boat. And then especially after the penalty shootout game in Brizzy, you really felt that lift of actually females can play sport, females can play football, and it's a really cool game to watch. And it's just such a great atmosphere. I had a very different experience there in terms of myself as a dietitian. I'm not always in the environment, in the camp environment. We have a very big team of support staff, and a key part of my role is in the lead up to key tournaments, getting the girls ready and making sure they're ready by the time that a key tournament comes. So I was in camp for the lead up to the tournament starting, and then I handed over the reins to the team chef and the sports science, and I worked from afar. So I actually had a really interesting way of experiencing that, where I got kind of best of both worlds, where I was in camp for the pre, but then I got to go to all the games and actually feel and be a part of the real rise in excitement and love for these players. So yeah, it was an amazing time, an absolute whirlwind, and I was exhausted by the end, but I can't imagine how exhausted the staff in camp were, but also the players. So yeah, full kudos to our support team. Honestly, the staff in Matildas are just second to none, and working alongside them and with them has just been such an honour. They work so hard. They're away from their families for around half the year, and I think a lot of people don't realise that. It's a really big job. It takes a lot, and there's a lot of sacrifice, but it also comes with a whole lot of reward, and it really is a second family because you do spend so much time together.
Thank you so much, Alicia. It's been amazing talking to you and getting some insight into sports nutrition, especially for female athletes, and also learning a little bit about Compeat Performance. I really appreciate your time, and thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, James.
It was great talking to Alicia about her role as a sports nutritionist and discussing female athletes, disordered eating, and her company Compeat Performance. The things that really stood out to me was her approach to normalising eating behaviours, focusing on the basics first and then refining things once athletes were meeting their energy requirements. She seemed to be ahead of the game developing an online-based nutritional service that helps teams, individuals, and also has a training and education component as well. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation with Alicia as much as I did.